This story is dominating both local and national headlines, as you can imagine. And while police try to find the person or people responsible, we're working to get a better idea of the mindset and thinking of a serial killer.
To do that, we're going to turn now to Dr. Robert Shug. He is a criminology professor at Cal State Long Beach and a licensed clinical psychologist. Doctor, good morning. You're considered a criminal mind scientist. Thanks for being here. Explain to us the characteristics of a person who would be a serial killer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I spent a lot of time talking about this yesterday, and I personally feel there really isn't sort of one mindset. I think there's a lot of heterogeneity amongst serial killers, at least psychologically speaking. Generally, I think what I found in talking to these guys, both in my research and as a forensic psychologist here in LA, regardless of what's going on in their mind psychologically, at the time of the killings, there seems to be a lot going on in their social environment. So things like job loss and relationship issues and financial problems, which may sort of add to or compound psychological problems.
So, Doctor, the people that seem to be targeted by this particular person or people, the people have been killed, men walking alone after dark. Just hearing those things, what does that tell you about who you think may be responsible for these murders?
Yeah, so serial killers don't typically target, 300-pound linebackers, right? They usually target people that are vulnerable in a place of vulnerability. So these people out in the middle of the night, and they could be for very legitimate reasons, but they are vulnerable given sort of, the environment and the context. Some of them may be kind of marginalized in society. Some of them might be sort of having their own problems. I think as a serial killer, it's best to target someone that you can kill. And so these people are in a place where he definitely has the advantage.
So no particular reason that it's just men?
I think the all-male victimology is interesting. I think we don't see that a lot, but I would speculate, and again, anything is possible, right? I would speculate these are victims of convenience who happens to be out in the middle of the night when it's dark on these darkened streets, as you know. I think it's sort of unclear at this point if the targeting of men is serving another purpose or not.
Dr. Shug, there are TV shows out like Criminal Minds that have really brought, like the idea behind a serial killer and the mindset, top of mind to folks. People watch those shows, and sometimes, law enforcement says they have a challenge because people watch those shows and think they can solve crimes like this within an hour. But how much of what may happen on those shows may be happening in reality, as far as the science and really kind of digging into this profile, if you will, of who this person may be?
Right. So Criminal Minds is a great show. I mean, and then we have the proliferation of all these other great shows, as you know. I think we need to think sort of outside the box. Much of what that show is based on was information provided by the FBI's studies in the 70s, which was great work, but was somewhat limited scientifically. And I think more recently, we should expect to see serial killers that sort of break those traditional molds that we have been sort of indoctrinated into. It's almost become a bit of a mythology, hasn't it? Like you would expect someone to come on and say, well, this will be a white male in his early 30s with daddy issues, right? And so we really have to kind of, I think, elevate the conversation and think beyond that because, as I said, it's a very heterogeneous group. You're going to see a lot of variability among serial killers.
Okay, well, despite what you're saying right now, who would you tell investigators to be on the lookout for, knowing what's going on in Stockton right now? Who would be your prime suspect?
You just want me to tell you who it is, right?
No, not exactly who it is, but like, be looking for someone who recently lost their job or someone who, something like that. Yeah. Is there anything you can tell us?
I mean, I as a forensic psychologist, I come in at the back end of things and I help people understand sort of why it happened once they're caught. But I mean, this is a person who's out at night, whatever that means. I mean, a lot of us aren't. And so could they possibly have a job that allows them to do that? Could they possibly not have a job that allows them to do that? They're shooting. My understanding is, and again, I check in, I Google serial killer Stockton update every morning and just sort of see what we know, and we don't know much. But if he's walking up to people in the middle of the night and shooting him in the back, I don't see that as particularly criminally sophisticated. I see it as a bit cowardly, to be honest. So I don't, these are all things that speak to perhaps a type of an individual, but I think still at this point we have to remember it could be anybody. And I would speculate that in the end, I wouldn't be surprised if the only remarkable thing about this guy is that just how unremarkable he is.
Dr. Shug, we have about 30 seconds. What is it that the public can do to help with this investigation?
Great question. So be safe, right? If we don't need to be outside in the middle of the night, I think that's probably a good plan. I think one of the key challenges this killer has is the technology available with cell phones, with Ring door cameras, with sort of the cameras that the government has in place at intersections and whatnot. So it will be challenging for him. But I think being alert, being vigilant, and staying safe, staying in larger groups of people, all would definitely help.
All right, Dr. Robert Shook, thank you so much for joining us this morning and sharing your insight on this, as there are many, many questions still about where this investigation is and where it's headed. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.